Hopefully everybody can hear me okay, but I'm excited to be here today. Shannon gave me an introduction, so I won't get into that anymore. But again, just Casey Knutson. I'm a child psychiatrist here in the Valley. So we're talking a little bit today about social media and mental health. This is actually a topic that I have presented on for about a decade now, which I was reflecting on that recently and surprised by how long I've been presenting on this topic at both the local, state, and national level. And so it's something that I've had a lot of passion about and interest in. And, it's really been pretty fascinating over the last couple of years. The research has changed pretty dramatically in this regard. And so it's kind of fun to talk more about kind of some of the new information that's out there and some of the changing landscape, which I'm sure most of you can anticipate what that's going to look like. But a few years ago, the research was less convincing, I guess, for lack of a better term. So it's been nice to kind of follow those trends over time. So next slide. As far as learning objectives are concerned, we're going to talk a little bit about just defining elements of mental health and then exploring the pressures to stay connected and the social media's impact on well-being for today's youth, and then talk a little bit about strategies to support the well-being of youth in today's digital age. Next slide. But before we do that, in order for us to be on the same page, I do think it's important that we are working within a common language. And so I do like to just cover a couple of definitions to start. First, what mental health is, right, which is the social, emotional, and behavioral well-being of students or of children, of even adults. But that is what mental health is. Next slide. And when we talk about specifically mental illness, that's typically when a condition, some sort of disorder has developed that impacts a young person's thinking or their emotions, their mood, to a point that it interferes with his or her daily functioning. And that's a really important part of mental illness, is that it has to be impacting daily functioning. Next slide. And now we're going to kind of dive right into adolescence and digital use, and start by talking a little bit about some of the statistics. So Shannon, if you want to just kind of click through these all, that would be fine. And I'll kind of touch base on each one of these one at a time. So approximately 95% of adolescents in the United States have at least one mobile device of their own, whether that be a tablet, a cell phone, or some other sort of electronic device. 95% of adolescents have one. 89% of adolescents own a smartphone specifically. And when we look at children and adolescents, you can see those numbers on the right. But children, when we speak about children in a lot of these statistics, we're looking at kids ages 8 to 12. But the approximate time spent viewing media for non-school purposes for children ages 8 to 12 is about 4.5 hours a day. Adolescents, for the same, it's about 6 2/3 hours per day, or almost 7 hours a day, that they're spending viewing media for non-school purposes. Approximately half, or 48% of 11-year-olds report owning a mobile phone. 11-year-olds, so that's fifth graders. And 85% of adolescents report the same by age 14. And then 1 in 3 users of the internet worldwide are under the age of 18. So you can imagine that as a consequence of that, adolescents and kids are a target audience when they're trying to when there's so much use in those individuals. Next slide. A few more statistics. You can bring all those up as well, Shannon. But these are looking at a bit more percentages and kind of the impact on mental health as a consequence of media. So up in the top left, but 17% of highest users expressed poor body image versus 6% of lowest users. When we're looking at those metrics, I know I didn't define it all out because I thought that just would take too much time and too much words, but when they're saying highest users, we're talking about those who are using media the most versus those who are the lowest users, meaning those who are using media the least, social media specifically. And so when there's a direct correlate, so those who are using social media more frequently, 70% express poor body image versus 6%. So there is a dramatic increase that we see with the use of social media. Along those same lines, 41% of teens reported having poor to very poor mental health versus 23% of those with the lowest use. So again, a pretty significant increase with social media use. 10% of the highest use group um, reported depression. That's backwards. So I apologize for those numbers, but that number flipped, but it's 55% of the highest use group versus 10% of the lowest use group. And then YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram accounts for about 87% of social media time. We'll get to that very bottom right one later, so I will ignore that one for now. Next slide. So now, when we talk about social media or young people in general, I'm curious to know, and if you guys want to throw some comments in the chat, what factors do you think shape the mental health of young people? And looking at some of those statistics and just through your own experiences, what factors do you feel like impact the mental health of youth? So I'm seeing some good comments. Biggest prominence is relationships, which I think is very true. Relationships with family and peers, peer relationships, acceptance, parental involvement, belonging, future stability in politics, which I think is so true. Trauma is a huge one. Environmental factors, I don't think we can state enough about the impact of the environment on our young people. Parenting practices and faith, genetics, also an important role. Very good. Keep those coming, but we'll move on to the next slide. I appreciate those thoughts. Oh, there we go. Here's just a chart, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but that identifies some of the factors that can shape specifically the mental health of young people. What I find interesting about this is, right, this can stem from the individual all the way up into the society as a whole. And so you can see some of the things that they list on an individual level, which are just some of our basic makeup, our age, our genetics, our race, our ethnicity, our gender, our sexual orientation. And then when we expand out into the family, this is what some folks mentioned in the comments: relationships with parents, caregivers, and siblings, families' mental health or families' mental well-being, financial stability. Some folks mentioned that stability, domestic violence, speaking of trauma, right? And then in the community, relationships with our peers and our teachers, our mentors, faith. So you guys listed a lot of these things that are given in this chart, which I really appreciate, all the way expanding into the society where we're talking about religion and racism and migration and media, which is kind of what we're focusing on today. Next slide. So now I wanted to bring some graphics to this talk because I do think it's important to have some visuals to see the impact of media. So when this graph is looking at major depression among teenagers, and as you can see, in girls and in boys, there's been a steady increase in the diagnosis of major depression. This is speaking of kids ages 12 to 17. Since 2010, that increase has been about 145%. And in boys over that same time span, it's actually increased by 161%. So boys are outpacing girls in terms of the percentages, but as just kind of generally, girls have struggled with depression more than boys have over time. And this correlates to one of those percentages that I gave earlier, which is that 41% of teens report mental health that is poor to very poor versus 23% of those with lowest use. Let's move to the next slide. This is looking at mental illness among college students. And along that same time span, I like to start in 2010. Anxiety disorders have increased by about 134% and depression by about 106% since 2010. ADHD has also seen an increase of about 72%. We've seen increases in the other disorders as well, but not nearly as dramatic a curve as you can just see by looking at those differences. Next slide. Anxiety prevalence, and this is based on age. And so you can see that our kids or individuals ages 18 to 25 have seen an increase of about 139%. And then as ages get older, those increases reduce. In fact, actually, anxiety has been identified as being slightly lower in individuals age 50 plus since 2010. Next slide. And we'll get into why some of these things are important in a minute. Emergency room visits, again, girls 188% increase since 2010, and boys 48% increase. And this is emergency room visits specifically for self-harm. Next slide. And then suicide rates for younger adolescents, again, those increases as you can see them going up dramatically. Girls increasing much more rapidly than boys, and this is for suicide rates for adolescents, specifically ages 10 to 14. Next slide. So this gray area that has been kind of a common theme throughout, that's on the far right, if you see that there on this particular graphic, highlights the years specifically 2011 to 2015. This has been identified as a major turning point in the mental health of young people. And what we see is that this graphic is specifically looking at communication technology adoption. And social media started slightly before that graphic in about 2005, 6, 7 is when it kind of launched. And then smartphones were introduced in around 2009, 2010. And so it was in this time that we saw a massive surge in all of those numbers that we were seeing as we see the percentage of US households that have social media and smartphones rapidly increase as well. And so we definitely say that there is a correlation to these two things. Interestingly, actually, 2011 is when the selfie was first introduced and thought to be a major component impacting mental health in young people. Next slide. So what is exactly the nature of this surge? Any thoughts that you guys have about this that you want to throw in the chat box would be great. When I say this, what we're asking is, why do you think that we've seen such a dramatic rise or increase in all of those graphics that I just showed in the last decade to decade now, decade and a half? Somebody threw out cyberbullying. I like that. Increased isolation, increase in comparison, a reduction in physical activity. Smartphones and social media, too much information access. Great. Keep them coming. Next slide. So why are we seeing this increase? Well, I think a couple of things are important. The rise is concentrated in disorders specifically related to anxiety and depression. In the mental health world, we classify those disorders as internalizing disorders, meaning that they're inside ourselves and oftentimes cannot be observed externally by others. So these are disorders that oftentimes we don't know and see. They're invisible to others, right? Family members, friends, they may not know that somebody's struggling with depression or anxiety. So they're kind of hidden inside, and it tends to be concentrated in Generation Z, which is our pretty much our most recent generation, or where our teens and adolescents fall, with some spillover into younger millennials. Going to that next slide. So where is there a generational divide? And I'm bringing us back to that graphic that showed those age differences. And this is looking at anxiety prevalence by age specifically. But as you can see, the increase is so much greater in our individuals who are younger aged. And we do believe that there is a direct impact from social media based on some of these graphics and what they're telling us. And so ages 18 to 25 have experienced some massive increases in anxiety. And 26 to 34, they're experiencing quite a bit of increase as well. So these are our earlier millennials that we were talking about on that past slide. Next slide. So what are the concerns? And when I say what are the concerns, what are the concerns of social media and social media use on our youngsters? And first of all, there is a negative impact on physical activity and physical fitness. And I saw a few comments in the commentary in the chat alluding to this. kids are not nearly as physically active as they need to be. And I could do a whole presentation on this, but we underestimate the impact of diet, exercise, and sleep on our mental health. And so that is definitely a negative. Decreased ability to interact with others in real life, right? They don't want to talk to people face to face. They'd rather text with their friends, FaceTime with their friends, or chat while they're playing video games online. They struggle with challenges making eye contact. They often avoid other people when they see them in the store or in public. It's not the, oh, hey, I haven't seen you forever type of response. It's, I'm going to go hide down the other aisle and avoid contact altogether. There's even fears of making phone calls. And this graphic to the right shows us that meetups with friends daily has dramatically declined. And unfortunately, we don't yet have graphics of what COVID has done to this, but I can anticipate in the next few years that we will see this even more dramatic as those graphics become more easily accessible. Next slide. You can just click through it. Have you witnessed the pressure of your kiddos to stay connected, or have you yourselves experienced the pressure to stay connected? I think it's a really good question. I think oftentimes we as individuals, as adults, struggle with the pressures to stay connected. I know I check my email all the time, including some of you have probably received emails from me at 11 p.m. or 12 at night because I feel compelled to respond. I'm not sure that that's healthy, and I'm not sure that it demonstrates very good modeling to our children. And I think most of us can certainly say that we've witnessed the pressures of our kids to stay connected. It's going to ask you to comment in the chat at that next click. So if you have any thoughts around that, I'd love to hear them. Let's switch to the next slide. So there is a book that Jonathan Haidt wrote called The Anxious Generation and how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. This, in my opinion, is a must read. It is a tremendous book that speaks specifically about this topic. And his main emphasis is how we've morphed from what we call a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. We've gone from a childhood where children are out interacting, engaging, playing, exploring, being creative, using their imaginations, to one where they're connected only through devices, where none of those things are being challenged, triggered, or driven in any way. Next slide. So when we talk about social media, there are four defining features that we need to talk about. One, the first one is user profiles. And those are users that can create, these are individual profiles that individuals will create where they might share personal information, they might share common interests. Then there's user generated content. And this is what users are actually putting out there to like broad audiences. Could be photos, it could be text, it could be videos. This is where TikTok and Instagram stories come into play. So these things are user generated content. Then there's networking, which is actually how we use social media to connect with other people. We might do this connecting with an old friend, but we also might do that by following somebody's profile, becoming friends with those people, or being part of a same community online, like Facebook groups, which are very, very common, I think, in the adult population in particular. And then there's interactivity, which is actually when we're interacting with another person through the contact we share. So we might like something, we might comment on something, we might share somebody's content, we might direct message somebody or slip into their DMs, as they say, right? To like share some thoughts about certain things. So these are different verbiages that you might sometimes hear used and that are used frequently throughout the book in The Anxious Generation. Next slide. So, what are the pros and cons of social media use? I do think it's important for us to pause and spend a few moments talking about both the goods and the bads of social media. So, when I'm going to shift over to the right first, which is different than what we would normally do, but I'm going to move to the right and talk first about the pros. I do like to focus on some of the positives of any topic that we're talking about. And so, when we talk about pros, there is connectivity and support. So social media has promoted connection with friends, with family, or with like-minded individuals, right? There's social media groups where parents with kids with autism might join and talk about some of their struggles or the things that they're going through and seek advice from others. And so that can create a sense of community and a sense of belonging for people that can be really helpful. And when people feel isolated or alone, they feel supported. um, it can give us access to resources. Like there are lots of organizations like Autism Speaks that is using social media and the internet to promote their resources to families and to individuals. And so mental health resources can be helpful. You can find coping strategies and just shared information. So individuals talking about it online can be helpful to hear somebody else's story. And then advocacy and awareness is another really important one. And I like to reflect still on the Me Too movement that happened a few years ago and the really positive impact that I think that helped giving women an opportunity to have voice about their experiences with domestic violence, and has been a really powerful influence in the world for good. Um, and so there's also other campaigns and hashtags that we can use. But what are the cons? Some of you guys already talked about these things. The biggest one is comparison and envy. There's tons of feelings of inadequacy and negative self-esteem that come as a consequence of social media use. Kids are comparing themselves constantly, and they're comparing themselves often to individuals online who live idealistic worlds or who at least post idealistic experiences, photos, or whatever else. And so they're quick to share those things. Sleep disruption is also a huge problem. And I spoke already to the importance of sleep, eating, and exercise with our youth. Phones, social media disrupts sleep. It interferes with the quality of sleep. And a lot of kids have FOMO, right? Which drives excessive use. And that I don't want to go to bed because I might miss something. And so it just creates this snowball effect. Poor sleep, as I mentioned here, equals mood disturbances. And then somebody mentioned, I think it was the first comment to our last question that we put in the chat, cyberbullying that can lead to anxiety and depression, and has gotten to the point where cyberbullies will say things like, go kill yourself, end your life. And people are actually following through on those invitations. Next slide. So, a couple of things that I think are important for us to mention. And speaking of foundational harm of social media, one is social deprivation. I'm not going to necessarily read all of these quotes because I think that would just take us too much time, but this harkens back to that daily average time spent with friends. As you can see, over the years, there has been a really marked decline in the amount of time that individuals are spending with friends. And that bleeds into even us as adults, where we see individuals spending less time with friends, with peers, because they are caught up behind the screen. Um, it really has become such a problematic thing, and why we're trying to encourage team-based sports, religious communities, religious involvement, activity at community centers, the YMCA, and being involved in other areas where you can interact and interface with others. Next slide. Sleep deprivation, we've already talked about this. I think I probably hit on this enough, but it really highlights this throughout this book. But heavy screen media associated with shorter sleep duration, and that just becomes problematic in our mental health. Next slide. Attention fragmentation. So this is something that we've noticed a lot because of the impacts of social media and the rapidity, the rapidness at which people are getting content, right? They just scroll, move to the next video, skip that video, move to the next video, skip that video. And as a consequence, their attention is so broken or fragmented. And so where does this bleed? It bleeds into their academic performance. It bleeds into their ability to interact or interface with their family, to their ability to fulfill their responsibilities at home, whether that be chores, homework, or even participating actively in sports, right? They are so distracted or feel so compelled to go back and look at that device. I need to make sure so and so didn't text me today. And so they're really wanting to go back and look, that their attention is so broken. I see this in my clinic every single day, just over there, sitting on the couch. Patients, they'll get a buzz on their phone and they can't not look at it. And I will challenge them not to. And it becomes such a distraction that eventually I say, just look at it because we're not making any progress in here. But it has become so problematic and so disruptive to our days. And I can say, even me with this thing right here, when I'm seeing patients, it buzzes with a notification, an email, a Teams message, whatever it might be. And I feel compelled sometimes to want to look at those things, even in the middle of appointments. Next slide. Addiction. What we are finding is that this is becoming an addictive process. And when we're mapping the brain, we are seeing that it is following the addictive pathway. There's still a lot of studies, and this is in its infancy, and a lot more research to be done in this realm. But we are fairly convinced that there it is an addictive process that is going to be very, very difficult to thwart if we don't do something to combat it in the immediate. And that has it's a daunting task, no doubt. Next slide. I think we're getting close. Um, so, four needed reforms. These are four things suggested that would provide a foundation for a happier and healthier childhood in the digital age. So, number one is no smartphones before high school. The evidence very heavily supports that. And when we're talking about that, we're speaking about kids prior to the age of 14. The guidance around this from academic agencies, from research being done globally and here in the United States, is that kids should not have smartphones before high school. And it can be really difficult, but there can be ways around that to still allow them access to that use when maybe they're traveling a lot for sports or different things, but still limiting the access to a smartphone specifically. Second recommendation is no social media before the age of 16. Kids really before that age have no business in doing so. And so, because it just leads to a lot of comparison and a lot of addictive tendencies. And so, limiting that as much as possible until kids are much more mature and advanced is what's recommended. My recommendation would be not before age 18, personally, but when you look at some of the literature, it's a little bit more lenient than I am, I guess. Phone free schools is another recommendation that is out there. And I think a lot of individuals are really trying hard to promote. It's really tricky, as you can imagine, because it just bleeds into so many different agencies and entities to try to do that. But getting rid or having phone free schools is really what would help promote a healthier childhood. And then far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. This kind of goes against what we all think. But you know what's interesting about this is that helicopter parenting has become a bigger problem in our society today. And part of that is warranted because of all the concerns out there, but it has also led to kids not having as much freedom, being forced to stay indoors more frequently, not being allowed to go explore the neighborhood as often with their friends. And as a consequence of that, they go to video games and social media and internet to occupy their time. So, really, when you look at it, the guidance is that kids are given more opportunities to engage in unsupervised play. And that can still be in the backyard, it can still be in the basement of your home. So, it can still be in safe environments, but doesn't necessarily need to be monitored every single moment of every single day. Next slide. So, what can we do to help? Number one, you can just kind of click through these, Shannon, is to set boundaries. In schools, we have to ensure that phones are being put away during school hours. I encourage you all, as parents, as medical providers, as people in the community, to encourage schools to do this in whatever voice or capacity you have. We really need to start getting phones put away during school. It helps with their education, number one. And number two, it helps to thwart some of these addictive tendencies with social media. At home, limit social media use, particularly around bedtime, because that's where kids can stay up too late and have disrupted sleep. but we should have kids turning off notifications on their phone, whether that be at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I don't care. But at some point, they shouldn't be getting notifications that they're getting text messages, a like on their post on Facebook or whatever else it might be. And really, the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that media time should be limited to 2 hours or less for kids. That's all media time. That includes television, tablets, phones, etc. So all media time limited to 2 hours or less. Also, as parents, we can help curate that feed. So we have to be supervising and encouraging our kids to unfollow individuals or accounts that result in negative feelings or trigger strong emotions. We want to encourage them to follow accounts that maybe educate or inspire or uplift them. I spelled that wrong. And then we want to ask ourselves when viewing social media, how am I feeling right now? Does this make me feel better about myself or does it make me feel cruddy? Am I having FOMO as a consequence of seeing all my friends on a trip that I wasn't invited to? Or does it make me feel good about myself? If it's not making you feel good about yourself, get rid of it. And then finally, practice mindfulness. So we need to maintain awareness of how social media impacts our mood and take breaks from it. Doing what we call social media uh, breaks or social media fasts, some people will call it, is when we just cut out all social media in our homes for a period of time. I did that. I practiced that recently for 7 days in my household, and it was astonishing the impact that it had on all members of my family, myself included. And it happened within 24 hours. The first 24 hours, the change was noticeable. And then engage in activities that foster happiness and well-being. Spend time with your families, spend time in the community, go out and do things, be together. Don't just sit on your sofa and not talk. That doesn't promote happiness and well-being. And I think for my time is up. That is it. Here's the learning objectives again, references on the last page, but thank you for allowing me to talk. I'm sorry I can be long-winded.
Casey, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I had a couple questions here about slides and recordings. So you can find the slides on our website, and then the recording should be available tomorrow on the website as well. We do have a couple minutes for questions here. I did just want to start with one that was in the chat here. Ashley Hammond said, I'm really encouraged by seeing the school districts adopt phone free during school, the Let's Grow project, etc., that are recommended at the end of the book. Uh,
It's a good comment, and I'm encouraged by that.
yeah. Mark, go ahead.
So I circled two things. Parenting practices are extremely challenging. So we have to supervise our kids like they're using razor blades, right? We set up boundaries, but we have to be so on top of it. It's like a full-time job. So that I acknowledge is hard, but that's what it takes for us to do it. The school situation, it's interesting. We talk about phone-free schools, but coaches, teachers, clubs, they couldn't function without chat. So they themselves talk about they use this, you'll hear this same narrative, but all their functioning is dependent upon Instagram or something like that. So the macro level challenge is epic, right? I know in our local school district, kids that use their Chromebooks in class to send pictures to one another. They're very Chromebooks that they're using for class. And so it's not just personal devices, it's also the Chromebooks. And then unsupervised play and boredom, what we see, we homeschool because for a variety of reasons. We participate in public school as well, but there's such a push towards, so we're not completely like anti-public school. I'm just saying that the push towards excellence and straight A's. When I subbed here at the school, the amount of homework kids have nightly is like at a young age, junior high, 2 to 4 hours. It's nuts. And so getting the Department of Education on board with this narrative in a genuine way is critical. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Mark.
good comments.
Well, Casey, thank you so much. We had lots of comments saying that this was really great. And so thank you so much for coming in to do this.